So hello and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be reanalyzing all of the confirmed Buddy 2 leaks. Over the course of the past 5 years or so, we've seen various bits and pieces of Buddy 2 being dropped here and there, from leaked artworks to developers speaking out about it. Today I'll be recapping all of the leaks about the 2008 version of Buddy 2, and giving my own thoughts on them as well. We'll start off with the map and the setting first, since I think it is a bit difficult to talk about things like characters and features without understanding the map and the setting first. So, Buddy 2 was going to be a direct sequel to the events of the first Buddy. Jimmy Hopkins would return as our protagonist and the story would essentially begin after the events of the first Buddy. Now with the map would be in an entirely new town, but it's unknown if Bulworth would have made an appearance in the intro, considering it was a direct sequel still following Jimmy, a little bit like how Liberty City was featured in San Andreas temporarily. Anyway, with this new map, they were going to keep it small like Bulworth, or in the developers' term, they never wanted to make a GTA sized map like we saw with Liberty City, both GTA 3 and GTA 4 versions, or San Andreas. Instead, the size they wanted was somewhere between that of GTA Vice City, because Vice City is the smallest GTA map, and 3 times the size of Bulworth. The map was one of the very first things leaked alongside various character concept artworks in 2017. We can see the map was definitely much more suburban than GTA's map, and considering that Bulworth itself was suburban, it possibly implies that all the Buddy series games would be taking place in suburban-like towns versus GTA's big city. The concept seemed to have the same level of vegetation as Bulworth did, maybe even a bit more, which would tie in nicely to Buddy 1, since as we know Jimmy doesn't live in Bulworth, he's just there for the year while his parents go on a cruise. So I would assume this new town is probably like an hour or two's drive away and Jimmy is a resident of New England anyway. Most of the concepts are of a small suburban-like town. There were no artworks like a district or a countryside that were leaked too, but we do have this concept of a rundown, borderline destroyed area. The fact it has graffiti of Jimmy's dad, and has a drawing of him in a dress, looks like it could be an area one of the antagonists Jimmy would encounter, or an antagonistic gang or something like that. There were a few 3D renders leaked, but understandably very incomplete and very low quality. Since the buildings look like they are just untextured LOD, maybe collision models, we can see what might be the only known image of Jimmy and 2 cars. I think somebody pointed out these might be from Grand Theft Auto 4, but I'm not sure on that. Also note how absolutely nothing is done past the bridge. This is probably the earliest known work of Buddy 2 in-game, I would assume. One area that was confirmed was a summer camp, but no concept artwork of it was leaked. But we do know it had a big role in the game, which I'll get onto later. The developers claim that in order to make up for Buddy's 2 map being much more smaller than that of Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption, at least, Red Dead was in development at the time, they wanted to put more effort into making the world much more detailed, such as having more enterable buildings. To give the immersion, this new place had much more depth and things to explore than Grand Theft Auto did. They also wanted to make the game's vegetation grow alongside the game's story too, such as having grass growing over time, as they put it. NPCs were going to be much more in-depth too, actually remembering Jimmy and how he acted towards them, alongside going about their day-to-day life, being much more advanced than they were in Buddy 1. Which, let's be realistic, Buddy 1's NPCs were not that intelligent. You can kick the shit out of somebody and 30 seconds later they'd be good as new, and still be on good terms with Jimmy. Now, if all of this sounds familiar, that's because it is. Most of what I just mentioned was actually in Red Dead Redemption 2, which at the time of Buddy 2's development came out 9 to 10 years later. And I'll be honest, I think this sounds way too ambitious for the time. We didn't even see anything like this in Grand Theft Auto 5, which would have been in its very early stages of development. It's only with Red Dead Redemption 2 we've started to see the world growing alongside the story, like building constructions, NPCs remembering what the protagonist did to them, decomposing bodies. I know Buddy 2 probably wouldn't have had decomposing bodies, but you get what I'm on about here. So even if the team wanted this for Buddy 2, I could genuinely see this being scrapped, or at the very least being implemented in a very, very basic way. The good news is the developers apparently did map out the entire terrain for the game's world, which, coupled with the fact we have a load of leaked artworks, heavily implies the map had a lot of work done to it. I'm not sure if the entire map was done, and to be honest I don't think it was. I would assume maybe about anything between 10% to maybe 40% of the map was done. Now the developers did confirm there was a playable build which is about 6 to 8 hours long, which if the map didn't have much progress done to it, the build wouldn't be that long at all. Now before you get excited and assume they were somewhere deep into the story, that's not necessarily the case. Red Dead Redemption 1 apparently takes 18 hours for the main story, 35 hours for GTA 4, and Buddy 1 is about 15 hours. Now keep in mind this is a playable build, not the story. So this could just be a mix of, like, say, main missions, side missions, some side activities and maybe a few collectibles here and there. That does not necessarily mean the story was 6 to 8 hours long itself. Anyway, let's get on to the characters, because we have quite a few of them. For returning characters, Jimmy Hopkins, as mentioned, would have returned as our protagonist again, and since the setting was going to take place pretty much straight after the events of the first Buddy, Jimmy's mother and stepfather would also be returning, if you can consider them returning characters since they appeared in the intro credits and never seen again. And pretty much the rest of the leaks have no mention of returning characters outside of these three, which I do find a bit weird since I think Zoe Taylor could have had some role here unless her and Jimmy broke up before the events of Buddy 2 began. Or maybe, at least at the time Buddy 2 was in development, they didn't have a way to write Zoe into the story yet. But either way, if her and Jimmy were still together, she could have just had like some role, even if it was just the occasional phone call or text to Jimmy. For new characters, we do have some step-siblings for Jimmy, who I would assume would be his stepfather's children from a previous marriage. Now with these characters, I don't think any concept artwork was leaked for them, but they were mentioned numerous times in numerous leaks. So I would assume these were main characters in a way. But onto the character concept artworks. There is Abe, a supposed war veteran who lives in the woods. He never specifies a war he lived in, and that's because he would eventually be outed as a fraud. He's a draft dodger and became so ashamed of himself he turned himself into a survivalist. He's also apparently a very psychotic character. Side note, when I do look at this character, and I did actually make a video on this a while back, I feel like some of his inspiration went into GTA 5's Trevor Phillips. Both characters are slightly older white men, receding hairlines, skinny, look scruffy, similar looking face shapes, have tattoos. Both characters are like psychotic and both seem to prefer the rural lifestyle in their own way. As mentioned, Abe prefers the woods, Trevor prefers the desert, and both characters have links to the military, with Abe pretending he served and Trevor was discharged. As you can probably expect, most of these characters don't actually have names, but next up is this tennis player, or tennis coach, and I reckon he would have been found at the summer camp. That's my best bet at least. Not sure if he would have had a role in the story itself, maybe a minor role or a side mission like the teachers got in Buddy 1, but I would assume, and this is assuming, if tennis was available as a side activity because it was cut from the first Buddy, he would have probably been found here. I also feel that, like Abe, I wonder if he was reworked or inspired to become Kyle Chavis in Grand Theft Auto 5. If you don't know who Kyle is, he's the tennis coach Amanda DeSanto was cheating on Michael with. I feel like this concept of the fat boy would have been one of the characters Jimmy would meet at the camp, because to me it would just kind of make sense, like Jimmy meets this guy at the summer camp and he tells Jimmy he was sent to the camp because his parents wanted him to lose weight or something. I can see this character would have been like Buddy 2's version of Algernon, because I can see some inspiration from Algernon in him. Next up is Nick, a scrawny looking nerd character, and I wonder if he was going to be sort of another Ernest type character, because as we know in Buddy, Ernest has this kind of obsession with the election and being a leader and stuff like that. Ernest has various flags and posters of himself stuck around the observatory in his comic book store, and Nick just has a badge which states vote for Nick. Okay, that's not the same as having flags and posters himself, but it could hint at another election kind of thing. Or maybe this character's name isn't Nick, and this character is like a supporter of this Nick character. Either way, he looks like an interesting character to me. He also looks like he'd be a comic relief kind of character. Okay, I know Buddy is a comedy game, but you know, some characters are way more comedic than others. Anyway, the next character is this heavily tanned older woman, and I think this is Jimmy's mother. If we compare them side by side, we can see the eyeshadow, which looks the same, so do the eyebrows and the nose. But of course, one glaring difference is the hair. Jimmy's mother has brown hair in the Buddy 1 intro, but this character has puffier blonde hair, although it is very likely she could have dyed her hair and had it done. It's mentioned that Jimmy's stepfather is rich, so you know he could have probably forked out quite a lot for some good hair treatment for his wife. Anyway, the way she's dressed looks like poolside or even cruise attire. And one bit of artwork that was leaked focused heavily on this house, which had like 2 pools here, which if this is where Jimmy would be living, I reckon this is where his mother could be found. If it is his mother, that is. I really do think it is. To me, I see a lot of resemblance in the face department. Next up is this Goth Girl. Now this Goth Girl, she really doesn't look like she'd be found anywhere near the summer camp, and to me is one of the harder characters to analyse since I can't really think of how she'd play a role in the story. I can see her character being a parody of the late 2000s emo and goth stereotype, and could see a few jokes about depression or self-harm being thrown around with this character. Maybe this could have been one of Jimmy's step-siblings, I'm unsure. The next character is a very interesting character to me because there's a clear 3D sculpt of his head on the concept art, which says to me this character is likely one of the more fleshed out and completed characters at the time of Buddy 2's development. At least completed by the time the build was released. When these concept artworks first did drop in 2017, I did actually think this character was like a postman, but reanalysing the character, that's clearly not the case. We can see a lot of military insignia on his back, so I wouldn't be surprised if him being in the military was how he lost his hand or played a massive part in his character. I can honestly imagine the scene where Jimmy meets him for the first time, he asks about his hand and the guy tells him about his service in, say, Vietnam or something like that. I also think this character would have been like the opposite of Abe, because to me this character looks like he actually did serve in the military, whereas with Abe he didn't. So I wouldn't be surprised if this unnamed military person and Abe somehow meet each other in the story and might have sort of bounced off each other, which is how Abe was able to be a fraud. That's just my thoughts on it. So that's pretty much it for the characters I could analyse. The rest of them I did have a lot of trouble analysing. But anyway, on to the missions. Now the developers only mentioned 4 missions, though I would assume there were many more done, but anyway, these missions were a mission that was heavily inspired by the Simpsons episode Camp Krusty, which would have taken place at the summer camp, and as soon as I read this, I felt like I knew what this mission would have contained. If you're one of the very few people who've never seen Camp Krusty, the episode features Bart and Lisa want to go to summer camp run by Krusty the Clown. However, when they get there, it's less of a summer camp, more of a slave labour camp, where Bart's buddies from school, Jimbo, Dolph and Kearney, are the camp counsellors. Eventually, Bart and the camp goers rise up and take over the camp for themselves, with Bart even raising a flag with a skull and Camp Bart written on it. I feel like as soon as I read this, I could envision the summer camp story and possibly even part of the chapter they had planned. A previous leak mentioned that Jimmy would have been sent here, so I can genuinely imagine the storyline with this summer camp began with Jimmy being dropped off there against his own will, maybe after he and his stepfather have another falling out again. As we saw in the Buddy 1 intro, yeah, you can guess they don't have the best relationship. And Jimmy runs into trouble with either a gang who run the place, think like Dolph, Jimbo and Kearney from Camp Krusty do, or like we saw with the Buddies and Greasers from the first game. And this chapter's story was focused on them, Jimmy going through a very difficult time here, and a few missions where Jimmy meets new people and makes some allies along the way, and the chapter culmination is Jimmy and potentially others taking matters into their own hands, raising hell at the camp and taking over it for themselves. And the chapter or mission ends with Jimmy running the camp like he did with Bullworth Academy, which would fit in really neatly with that Camp Krusty inspiration, alongside being in line with how chapters from Buddy end anyway, with Jimmy taking over. A second mission they mentioned involved Jimmy in his underwear, and for some weird reason they specifically mentioned a bulge. The only thing that could have played a role that came to mind was a mission where Jimmy finds himself in his underwear as some kind of near nudity thing played off for laughs, like we've seen in various adult comedies like, say, Austin Powers, The Inbetweeners, American Pie, etc., or even games like Saints Row, which I guess could fit in well with the supposed theme of wanting to get inspired by more adult humour. The team did say they wanted to use more risque humour, which is a bit of a step further from Buddy 1's style of humour because, you know, there wasn't that much. There were a couple of sex jokes here and there, but they weren't as in your face as Grand Theft Auto's were. So I would assume that means Buddy 2's humour would be a mix of Buddy 1's and Grand Theft Auto. I still can't think of how Jimmy in his underwear would tie to a mission. The third mission they mentioned had something to do with go-karts, which to me was either that traditional Rockstar racing mission, which we get in pretty much every single one of the open world games, or something involving stealing go-karts. I'd probably lean towards it being more that traditional Rockstar racing mission. Like, I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if the mission premise was Jimmy being challenged to a quick race. Plus, with it being a part of the supposed playable build, it kind of makes sense for it to be a racing mission, you know, just be a test mission to, you know, see how racing works. The fourth mission they mentioned involved the Beekeeper. Now, I can only think of 2 things that come to mind again. Either A, Jimmy stumbles upon a bee farm, finds it destroyed, talks to a local beekeeper who complains about someone, or a gang or whatever, rival beekeeper coming in and destroying the place, which means the mission would have been like investigating them or going to beat up the rival gang or the rival beekeeper, or the mission would have been like last minute shopping where Jimmy rides into town and collects supplies for the beekeeper. I think both are equal possibilities given its bully. Now, minigames were going to return, and the only 2 I know of that were confirmed from the leaks were some arcade minigames, which are sadly unknown, and lawn mowing, which apparently would have tied into the dynamic world. And I assume it would have been the exact same lawn mowing minigame from the first. It's also interesting to me about the arcades because I genuinely wonder if any of the scrapped arcade minigames made their way to Grand Theft Auto Online's casino update, since, you know, you can now buy and play arcades in Grand Theft Auto Online. Speaking of vehicles, a lawnmower and go-kart are basically confirmed of what I just said, and Jimmy was never going to be driving cars. This is mostly due to the fact that Jimmy was still a kid, and the map size, as the developer said, was a bit too small for cars. And by that I assume they meant that driving would make the map feel much more smaller than it really is. They never mentioned if skateboards or bikes would be making a return, but I would assume that bikes would have made a return because they were pretty much a staple of Buddy. You know, like how horses are in Red Dead and cars are in Grand Theft Auto. Jimmy's movement would have been overhauled for the better. I don't just mean fighting, but climbing. Jimmy would not just be limited to climbing, well, ladders and trees, but now he could climb fences, ledges, windows and rooftops. Apparently they did experiment with Grand Theft Auto assets. So it wouldn't surprise me if some props or even a small area from GTA 4's map would have temporarily been in Bully 2. That does not mean that, say, Bohan in Liberty City was going to be in Bully 2, but considering that GTA 4's map was much more complete at the time, I wouldn't be surprised if they did temporarily use that to experiment with Bully 2's moveset and then, delete it down the line. And when it comes to hiding, Jimmy would hide behind walls and shimmy around them, which itself was a feature first introduced in Grand Theft Auto 4. And I think this would have been used in heavy combat missions too, like how we do use it in GTA 4, 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2. And Jimmy could still hide from people by flat out diving into bins, so that was making its triumphant return. And because of that, I would actually assume the wanted level system was going to be the exact same as it was in the first Bully, which to be fair, following Bully, GTA 4, Red Dead 1, GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2, the wanted level system has kind of been how it was in Bully, if that makes sense. Like in the PS2 GTAs, you basically just had to find the stars around the map, or die. Whereas with starting with Grand Theft Auto 4, the wanted level system was changed drastically, where to lose police, all you had to do was just stay at their site for a short while, and then eventually they'd just give up. Which is basically how it works in Bully, so yeah, I would assume the wanted level system was the exact same. Now for music, Sean Lee, the composer for the soundtrack of the first game, did confirm he would be returning to compose music for the sequel, which was actually one of the earliest confirmations of Bully 2 back in 2009. However, in more recent interviews, he denies this. Now this could be down to two reasons. Either A, he realised he broke an NDA and shouldn't have said, yes, I'm working on Bully 2, because it could land him in legal trouble. Or B, which is also equally likely, he's telling the truth, and when he's asked about the Bully 2 sequel he denies it because he's not working on the Bully 2 soundtrack. And there's a chance that after this project was canned, at least the 2008 build of the game, Sean was not contacted by Rockstar again. Which is, as mentioned, likely because, as far as I know, Sean Lee's music has not made an appearance in Red Dead Redemption, GTA 5 or LA Noire. So yeah, that about wraps up today's video. Thank you for watching, and I hope you sort of enjoyed this massive retrospective look back at all the Bully 2 leaks and analysis of them. So thank you for watching, and have a great day.